Probably when I left high school, a career in local government perhaps was the last thing on my mind.
So where's this?
This is that I was educated, born and raised in the Burdekin, born in Home Hill, and married my wife Carol in 30th of April 1972. But started a career in December 1963, straight out of high school. My mentor at the time was the Shire Clerk, a gentleman by the name of Keith Venables, and he was a tremendous influence on my career because initially I thought, well, I was looking to do a trade and I wouldn't have to do apprentice papers.
So how old were you then?
I was 16.
Wow. 16, straight out of high school.
Straight out of high school.
Burdekin State High School.
Ayr State High School.
Ayr State High School.
Yeah. Educated Home Hill Primary School and Ayr State High School. Keith Venables was an outstanding influence on my career because he said, you're not just going to sit here as a young clerk and elevate through to a senior position here. I want you to be ambitious enough that you could eventually be my successor as Shire Clerk. So I did my local government clerk's certificate as was required then, and 3 of us were studying at the time, and he undertook that whoever was first through would become his deputy, and that happened in 1980, and I was appointed Shire Clerk in 1986. And then when the Act was changed, I became the CEO in 1992, and my whole career, I believe, may have been in Burdekin, but I made the choice in 2004 that at age 58 I wanted to see if there was any other challenges out there. People told me it was a brave move because we live in times now where sometimes people think at age 45 that's your use by date, but I decided to make a career move in 1958. It happened at my farewell that I was approached by a senior officer in the Department of Local Government, and probably one of the most challenging roles in my career was administrator at Johnston Shire. A local government hadn't been sacked for about 19 years before that, and a local government hasn't been sacked since. But under the Local Government Act, I was appointed the administrator.
When was that?
That was in 2007. I was appointed by Parliament in February. I started in February the 9th, 2007, up until the March 2008 local government elections. The council was sacked because it was seen to be dysfunctional. It had its financial record. It was the most financially stressed local government in Queensland, and it had a bullying and a intimidating action around the council table, and wasn't communicating well within its community. And that all happened after Cyclone Larry. And I started, as I said, on the 9th of February 2007 and concluded on the 31st of March 2008. It was probably one of the most challenging roles in my career because there was no template to work from other than turning the council around. And I still probably hold the record for the biggest rate increase in local government in the one budget that I controlled. It was a 15% increase. It could have been 30%, but we had to make some substantial changes to get it to that. A wonderful community. I was also at that time chair of the local transition committee that brought about the amalgamation of Johnston Shire and Cardwell Shire to form the Cassowary Coast Regional Council from March 2008, and that council now is well out of the mire. I gave it a start, but people like the Mayor Bill Shannon and CEO Terry Brennan were instrumental in following that 10-year plan, and that council is in a very...
It's going now.
It is. It's not very good. But I admired them for following the plan. I made some difficult decisions. They continued to ensure that became a very soundly managed council. From there, I went to... my wife and I moved down here in September 2008. As I said, I finished up in March 2006. We had a holiday, and I was looking to get back into the workforce. In November 2000...
Sorry, you say you finished up in 2006?
No, I finished up at Innisfail in March 2008.
Yep. Then you had a bit of a break.
Had a bit of a break.
Then moved to Brisbane in September.
And I had my resume around in local and state government, and Hayden Wright was the deputy to the CEO, and I was recruited. I was recruited as part of a small team involved in the gap storms at the time. It was a major emergency issue.
I didn't know.
And I was in the small team in the recovery situation. Had a long history in
So when was that?
risk in November 2008. And,
they worked for Brisbane City?
Yeah, for only 3 months to restore the gap area after those major storms. As I said, emergency
When was the storm in the gap?
November 2008.
But I thought it was sort of Christmas time. No, it was
No,
November.
just before November. Yeah.
Okay.
So I worked on a small team involved in the recovery from that, and from there I applied for and was appointed into a George Street in the state government in the Coordinator General's Department. That was in contractor 2009. I was on a state government committee to look at Indigenous communities for about 6 months, and then from there...
When was the Coordinator General Department appointment?
I started in the Coordinator General's Department in January 2010. I was on that Indigenous task force from July 2009 to November 2009, and then started in the Coordinator General's Department as Manager of Specialist Projects, and I was there until May 2012, at which time I was Director of Regional Development. Major projects included the Connors River Dam and the coal seam gas resumptions associated with that. So that was really rewarding, and I got to understand, moving from local government to state government, gaining a little bit of a better understanding of what George Street was about. And then I was approached in May 2012. I had a secure position there, but I was approached in May 2012 to be the policy advisor to David Crisafulli, who is the new Minister for Local Government in the Newman government, on a 12-month contract, and I stayed with him for 12 months. And after that, I joined the private sector when I was offered a position with Gary Keller. Gary had a long career, and Gary, Ian and I have had a long career in local government, and Gary
I'm
asked,
very much the junior partner.
Gary asked me, Gary was CEO at Logan City for 26 years, so there's been a few since him there. I was at
Have we got a copy of that?
Yeah, these are your copies. At Burdekinshire, it's interesting, given the movements in local government now, I was CEO there for 20 years, and I was the shortest serving CEO at Burdekinshire in 73 years. There was only 2 before me, and now they're on their 3rd one in the last 10 years. And interestingly, that Terry Brennan's now the CEO at Burdekinshire, so they're in very good hands there, because Terry, like Ian and myself and Gary, long-serving, very competent CEOs, and Burdekin's in very good hands with Terry as its leader.
Your former mayor's back.
My former mayor, when I finished,
Lynn
McLaughlin, she interesting for her career too. She's the first mayor ever to be re-elected They're kind to you when you're a mayor in the Burdekin community, but if you get beaten, you don't come back. But Lynn defied the odds, and she got re-elected in
Did some good work on
March
the Grants
2016.
Commission. She's still on the Grants Commission.
No, I think she stood down from the Grants
Okay.
Commission. Yeah. She's on the James Cook University board still, but yeah.
So just going back a bit, back to 1963 at age 16, you started at Burdekin. What did you start as?
Well, you don't use the term now, but junior male clerk.
Junior male
Clerk,
Junior
yeah.
clerk. That's
Male, junior
yeah.
clerk.
That's the same thing as normal stuff talking about.
Somebody once asked me, was that MAIL or MALE?
Yeah, so you worked your way up then
Yeah,
from there.
and as I said,
And
Keith
did your
Venables.
studies as you went.
Yeah, Keith Venables was always regarded as a mentor who was very keen on ensuring that you advanced yourself in local government, and he gave a lot of people in the organisation that chance. And
When did you get your clerk's certificate again? You did say
good
before.
question. 1975.
Yeah. And you became deputy CEO then,
No, I became deputy CEO in
1980.
1980,
Yeah.
and then a CEO I was Shire Clerk,
Deputy Shire
CEO.
Clerk it was
yeah.
then, wasn't it?
In 1986, October 1986.
Just got a pen that wrote.
Yeah, I know.
That's right.
So when you went into Johnston,
Yeah.
how do you even approach that situation?
How do you approach it? Well, my approach was that you're a new kid on the block, that whilst there were a few people in Innisfail would have known me, I had an excellent PA and a lady by the name of Jill Sorensen.
Yep.
She'd been a long-serving member there, worked with quite a number of CEOs. I knew a few people in the community, but to be successful, I wanted to gauge whether the community was satisfied in being led by one sole decision maker. There were no other councillors. I made all the decisions. Some very difficult ones around financial management.
There's good and bad with that, isn't there?
It's good and bad with that. As I said, it was a 15% rate increase. I don't know if any local governments increased their rates by that amount since, but it was very necessary. Financial management was very poor, and the culture was poor. The staff were excellent. I had a good CEO who's still in local government now, Stuart Randall,
Oh, yeah.
and a good finance team. I engaged with the audit and risk management team even to the point of letting them know the budget strategy. And I had a community reference group. The first decision I made was on a major waste management contract, which they didn't support. They'd had a major company and I'd supported a local company getting the project. They didn't have any experience and it was a 7-year contract, but they were about $700,000 less than the original contractor. And whilst the committee didn't see that I should go with somebody who'd been unproven, I went with that person, and they had an excellent 7-year contract, and the old company got it back when they re-tendered. The other part that I prided myself in was that to be open and transparent. Council meetings are open, and they were well attended. And whilst I didn't disclose to the public what my strategy would be for the budget, I put enough leaks out there to indicate that it was going to be reasonably savage, with the employee cost being a major cost. My strategy was not to make anybody redundant, but to look at natural attrition as a way of doing it. When the local government reform came in, one of the criteria was that you couldn't make people redundant during that process anyway. So we looked at that, but I was surrounded by a keen and committed staff who were willing to support me, and a community that I engaged with and felt that they generally believed that the council had to be dismissed. So that made my task easier. In engaging with the community, as I said, I had a number of public forums to let them know on major decisions, and also I had a weekly column that the media were the print media were happy for me to have a column in the local Advocate, Innisfail Advocate. It had a unique name. It was called the Webb page. So
That's good.
I was able to, and as I'm doing today, they said, well, we'll give you 500 words. I don't think I ever met that target. Most of my columns were near 1,000 words, and they always made the space available to cover what I wanted to put in there. And that was good with the community.
Yeah.
Another leader who I learnt considerably from in that time, and it was only for a short period of time, was Peter Cosgrove. He was responsible for the recovery after Cyclone Larry. Learned a lot from him in terms of how he engaged with people.
When was Cyclone Larry?
Okay, it was 1986. It's 1980. Good question.
Late 1980?
No. It was mid 19. Well, the elections were in. I was appointed in, what did I say, 2007.
Johnston.
Well, the council was elected in 2006, March 2006, and the 20th of March was 2006. 2006 was Cyclone Larry, 20th of March, yeah. And Peter Cosgrove finished on the 20th of March 2007, and I finished on the 20th of March. I stayed till the 31st of March, but 20th of March 2008. So, yeah, Peter Cosgrove was a leader. I learnt, as I said, I had an excellent mentor in Keith Venables, and also Peter Cosgrove was somebody I learnt a lot from. And I got back a couple of times. Two of the major decisions was that the Shire Hall was severely damaged, so we had to move our staff out of there. And it was historically listed, so the council only had insurance for $5 million. By the time I arrived, they'd had a $10 million bill, of which Peter Beattie, state government, gave them that $5 million. And the completed cost, because it was heritage listed, was $15 million. So within that budget framework, I had to find another $5 million to complete the building. And it's a building that if anybody wants to have a look at a little bit of history, because the Johnston Shire Hall in Innisfail was one of the first Shire Halls in local government in Queensland. And it's been restored to that original history values, which I was very proud of. But what looked like a $5 million bill ended up $15 million to repair it. That was just from the cyclone damage. The other major decision I made while I was at Innisfail was to put in a low-risk prison camp, which divided the community. Which divided the community, because a prison camp within the town of Innisfail was one that divided the community. I worked with the minister at the time, Judy Spence. We looked at a number of land options, and we ended up putting it in an industrial estate. But there were some beautiful old colonial homes adjacent to it from one of the mills that had closed down. Doctors and accountants lived there, and they weren't happy. But the pleasing aspect of it, whilst that was a divided opinion, that now 10 years on, that camp is well regarded in the community. They buy all their food and produce and all that locally, so it's a good little earner for the community. And as I said, I always remember fondly my time at both Burdekin and Innisfail.
So the prison camp's where?
It's in Innisfail.
Innisfail, so is the Shire Hall.
The Shire Hall's in Innisfail,
Both of those projects are in
even
Innisfail.
with the amalgamation, Innisfail is the main, with Cardwell, Innisfail is the main centre, yes.
So back to Burdekin, what were your big highlights there?
Burdekin,
and your lowlights?
Yeah, no, well, didn't have any lowlights really, because why I stayed for 20 years at Burdekin is that I always worked with very progressive councils. always worked outside the square. It was a community, and a lot of rural communities are like this. It had a very strong volunteer mindset. Back when local government was moving into the area of arts and culture and welfare services, Burdekin had models that were used subsequent to our model. We had a 530-seat raked theatre, fully acoustic-wise, it's one of the best in Australia. We have a strong sporting and recreation policy where we provided interest-free loans to sporting bodies and to build sporting facilities, netball, basketball. We built a basketball stadium. Netball's very strong in the Burdekin. We've got outdoor courts for that. The other major one was the cultural centre. You've seen the cultural centre. That project, within a community of 20,000 people, we raised $850,000 as a contribution to that project. So as well as the council putting the money, the community got behind it to that extent.
That's amazing.
20,000, a lot of corporate sponsorship, and that model was used also in building and expanding aged people's facilities in the Burdekin, same sort of deal. So philanthropically wise, the Burdekin has always been regarded as a very generous community, and we've achieved results in recreation, sport, library, cultural facilities where community donates big money as well as paying their rates for those facilities.
Wow.
So that's what I liked about it, that sort of culture. And as I said, I worked with very good councillors over that 20 years. Why did I make the change? Well, under my contract I had to give the council 6 months notice. I gave them 7 months notice, only because people told me, well, I was untried outside the Burdekin and to try and do something a little bit different.
2004.
2004,
at 58.
Yeah, at 58. So
What happened between 2004 and 2007?
when I was 2004, there was a gap. We went on a holiday after I finished at Burdekin,
Right.
Carol and I, and then when I came back, because there was a challenge against me going up to Innisfail, two of the councils took an action in the Supreme Court. I didn't start that job until February 2007.
But you actually worked on it before that.
Yeah. And finished in March 2008. And as I said, then we stayed around for a little while. I was doing work with the state government through the Indigenous Community Project. And then we moved down here in September, bought this home in September 2008. We bought it in March 2008, but didn't move down till September because the uncertainty was when we'd still get something else through the state government by still being able to use Burdekin as a base. But we also did what most people tell you not to do, is followed our children, because they were all, two were in London and Troy was here, with all the families back here now, and all within an hour's drive of where we live.
So did your kids grow up in Burdekin?
Yeah, they were all educated like we were at Ayr. They were educated at. We lived in Ayr, for instance. We got married in September 1972, and they were educated at schools in Ayr, and then Ayr High School. They graduated from Ayr High School like I did, and went to all three of them. Two of them went to James Cook University, and one went to what's the second? Not UQ. Yeah. Down here, and two have got master's degrees, and one's just come back from London, and as I said, married, and she's doing. She's working in the voluntary area now. Paid for what's called the Kokoda Trail.
Oh yeah,
she's working for that.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
A fundraiser.
Yeah, they do good things.
So where are we up to? Lowlights. Worst thing about
We're up to there, are we? We done all this? Yeah.
Oh, I think I've given you all the stories. Yeah. I've got to be conscious of the time. I don't want to be the one that you spent the most time with because I just rode on.
You've got a fair while.
We don't keep a record of time.
No, we
Okay. Lowlights, probably nothing during my career. When I moved to the state government, it probably confirmed that we live in a state where local governments not as well understood as it should be by state government.
Yeah.
I tried
That's a
to...
statement.
Local government's not...
That's a story in itself.
Coming from North Queensland, you always had a little bit of suspicion of George Street. So I was fortunate enough to work in the Coordinator General's Department in projects that really impacted on Queensland. And that was important because, as I said, at 58 or 59, when I was appointed there by 2 senior officers in the Coordinator General's Department, I probably would have been one of the oldest public servants to be appointed in state government. But again, people like Andrew Corthez was a great mentor because he'd worked a lot of his life out of Brisbane and was keen to get an understanding, because we were involved in regional development,
What's his
that
name
meant. Andrew Corthez, who I still Curthys, who I still keep in touch with. We catch up. That's one of the beauties I felt of my career. I've always been able to catch up for a coffee with people that I've worked with before. All my PAs, I still keep in touch with all my former PAs. And former mayors, I still ring and contact from time to time. But the low light is probably, I think, there's not an understanding of the important role of the CEO in local government now, and the importance of developing the relationship between the CEO and council, and as much for mayors and councillors to understand there is a different role. And it's easy to criticise and say, oh, CEOs do it by the book, but the reality is, if you stray from legislation, you've got organisations like the Ombudsman and CCC who'll come down on you from a great height. And good CEOs are able to give their mayors and councillors advice to stay, how they can keep themselves away from that area. Because the reality is, if you look at the history, communities judge harshly councils who fail to comply with sound governance practices.
Yeah.
So that's something, and it is also, from my point of view, sad. There's a balance between staying too long and having your career cut short. And with a life now of a CEO of 2.5 years, that's not beneficial to the local government industry at all.
No.
And I think there's more education needed in terms of understanding what the different relationships are, and just because a new council is elected doesn't mean it's time to part company with a CEO, and I think that's happening too much. And
So how would you go about rectifying that situation?
well, it's not a lot different to the challenge I had up in Innisfail. It's really working on developing relationships. And if an incoming mayor and councils have a perception that the CEO was too close to the former mayor and councillors, the reality is the CEO is probably just ensuring that councils had an understanding of their role and that of the separate role of the CEO. Because CEOs at all times aren't always giving the best of messages, but they're always making sure that they keep their mayors and councillors away from CCCs and ombudsmen. But at the same time, that they're engaged. The important thing about local government is you engage with your community and keep your community informed, even with the unpopular decisions. You've got a better chance of being read. And without naming names, you'll see some mayors in the southeast corner are very good at engaging with their communities, keeping their communities informed. When there's changes in policy, they let the communities know. And as I said, without naming them, they seem to get re-elected. But if you start becoming aloof,
They don't
or you
necessarily follow the rules.
or some of them don't.
Some of them still how to do that.
Yeah,
presumably.
yeah.
Do you think there's too much pressure on the CEO, the amount of things they're expected to do, particularly with councillor behaviour and reporting around all that?
Yeah, there is, because if a CEO is doing his job and there is a mayor or a councillor that's misbehaving, the responsibility rests with the CEO to report that, and that's not easy. There may be changes to the legislation with some of the work that Gary and the committee have been working on to
certainly needs some change.
Some change, yeah. I think there's a recognition by the state government that there may need to be a panel rather than the CEO taking responsibility.
Someone else needs to be there to help.
Yeah.
We're just fascinated with Harold, all the legislation changes he was rattling through. He was the big legislator, obviously. He said that's the job he most liked to do, was just sit there and write legislation. I can think of nothing worse.
Buildings Act.
Well, one of the things that created a misconception, because I was there when that happened, when I was policy advisor to David Crisafulli, the LMP policy which he had to articulate was there needed to be changes to the legislation to avoid any misunderstanding that the mayor and the councillors were in charge. In other words...
And now we've gone too far the other way.
And it's gone, I believe it's gone too far the other way.
All mayors have the same. To be like the mayor of Brisbane. Which is
so that's probably, that comes within the definition of a little bit of a low light. It was perception more than reality, because the Act was changed and mayors now are required to bring the budget down. Well, they still have to work with their CEO to make sure that happens. And there are not too many other changes that really reflected major reform that identify. See, at the end of the day, the mayor is the chief executive and the CEO is the chief executive officer, and that's probably no different to a board type structure. But the difference in a board type structure is there's an acknowledgement that the CEO is responsible for management, administration, and council determine the policy.
I think a lot of times the CEO gets the bad end of the stick because they're not seen out there in the community as much as the mayor.
and that
mayor steals the limelight. Not that we're looking for limelight.
No.
People don't understand their position at all.
Don't quote this one, whatever you do. I used to work. One of my mayors for 10 years was a fellow by the name of John Woods, and he's back as a councillor now. John Woods, and I'm 180 centimetres. He'd be about 30 or 40 centimetres taller than me, about 6'7" in the old style. And when I'd have to introduce him at a function, I'd say...
He's a pretty solid fella too.
Yes, big fella. I wouldn't get into a fight with him. I'd introduce, we were at a function, I'd introduce him as the CEO, and I said, this is our Mayor, John Woods. We don't always see eye to eye, but I do look up to him.
That's very good.
He got defeated in an election and stood at the last election for a councillor position, got returned. Lynn she was defeated in an election and stood as mayor and got back. And in the history of the Burdekin, it's the first time a mayor who's been defeated has actually been returned. So that was unique. And where are we now?
It's amazing the number of different councils you see over your time. You had 20 years at Burdekin, I had nearly 20 years at Burma.
Yeah.
The number of councils we've seen come and go.
And
you don't get any credit for making that transition rather smoothly. To everyone, it all happens, but there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes.
And as I said, sadly,
you don't get any credit for.
Sadly now, more than back when Ian and I were in the service, is perception with a newly elected mayor sometimes that you were too close to the previous administration, and
it seems bizarre.
It does seem bizarre.
I can remember back to the days new councillor would come in and talk to you in the lead up to the election and want to know things and come and seek your guidance through it as they started their career, but it doesn't happen anymore.
No. Probably just on tough things. One of the toughest things also is the time between when the election is finished and when you declare the poll. And that's the time for mayors to clear out their office. And it's a sad time for them, you know. And
this is the days when the Shire clerks used to run the elections as well.
Yeah, and a sad time because, you know, I've always worked for mayors who are very community-minded, and end of the day, the democratic process determines whether they get re-elected or not. And when they're not, as I said, it's just a little sad occasion helping them clear their desk out to move out of their office.
I wouldn't even have thought of that.
It's interesting you're saying the shelf life of a CEO is 2.5 years.
Yeah.
The mayors used to usually get 1 or 2 terms, didn't they?
Yeah,
and that's sort of changed.
Yeah,
They hardly get back.
A mayor and councillors could, and even with the state and federal government, you could almost be certain that you'd get 2-3 year terms. But now that it's 4 years, public are saying, well, do we want these people for another 4 years? And it's a shorter service. I don't know if too many mayors and councils get long service medals now for at LGAQ conferences, because
so there's more and more pressure. They've got to do more in their term as well.
Yeah.
So
do you think that was a good move? Do you two think that was a good move?
The 4 year term?
Yeah. I
don't see any problem with a 4 year term. It does, from a strategic planning point of view, it does give you that extra year.
Yeah.
I don't have an opinion, but others do, that councillors now are far better paid than they were. So they look at that as a determinant. I don't necessarily believe that's the case, but it is. Mayors now particularly are full-time jobs, so they're appropriately rewarded. But
the 3 year term, you were more likely to get a second term because 3 years wasn't seen to be enough.
No,
but 4 years, you're not guaranteed of a second term.
No.
Do you think so? Some people say the payment of councillors to be like a fair wage has attracted people who aren't necessarily community minded or experienced enough to just be doing it as an on the side kind of thing. What do you guys think of that?
Oh, the reality, local, more and more is being thrust on local government to take responsibility for an ever-increasing range of programs.
With no funding coming with it.
Exactly that. I think local government now, there is far greater pressure and not the same level of both federal and state subsidies. There are subsidies for particular programs, but not the same sort of local government's expected to meet more of the cost associated with service delivery. And I use the expression, we live in times of opposing expectations where communities are always tending to be demanding more, or comparing your local community with another community where they've got services that you may not have. But at the same time, public don't want to dig any deeper into their pockets to pay any more in rates.
And you've only got a very limited source of income. Rates is your major thing, and more and more pressure to run the council as a business and think of ways to make your own money.
So
there's not too many options.
No.
Is paying councillors a good move then?
No.
There's a balance between, because I know most councillors have the community at heart, but there are sacrifices they have to make if they're businessmen or farmers or on the land, or particularly school teachers. It's pretty limited as to your ability to stand for council if you're a school teacher.
I think they get paid like a salary, a decent salary, and they feel they've got to earn that by doing a lot more than they used to do.
Or being in the office too.
Yeah, they've got to be there and stick their nose and everything, whereas before they just used to attend meetings and represent the community. Now it's sort of, they feel they've got a job. And it's not necessarily just the community, it's about, justifying why they're getting paid. So they've got to find things to do that isn't necessarily a good thing.
No.
Can be, but
and understand. Really, it's education and engagement, and balancing egos. Egos is another thing.
You used to be able to tell them things. Now you can't.
No.
They got their own bloody.
And
view
as I
of the
said,
world,
I observed that's a little. I observed that in going into the state public service, because I'd attend senior management meetings and have input and engage with them, and you'd get the tap on the shoulder. It's a good idea, Webby, but politically it's not going to travel.
Fly, so don't even raise it.
Don't even raise it.
Wow.
And in one of those areas, suddenly now I'm seeing that governments are starting to say, wow, yes, we may have to change policy. And that was in the coal seam gas area. We were exporting every bit of gas we could extract out of Gladstone. And my questions were, well, why aren't we retaining some of this for our own domestic market? And now we're finding we haven't got enough. So that's where government's got to negotiate with gas companies.
It's very conservative, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't rock the boat.
No,
it's set in its ways.
Yeah.
Has that changed at all, do you think? Is it
Look,
changed?
the reality is that I think, sadly, we don't think beyond election cycles.
Yeah.
Local governments have 5-year plans, and they're good, and they engage with the community. But once they had
Probably
strategic,
there's an election in the middle.
yeah, and they have strategic, longer plans. And the reality is, local government has to identify what its loan borrowings are over a 10-year horizon.
There's a requirement to make all these long-term plans.
Long-term plans, but everybody wants to live for the here and now.
Yeah.
And that's not only local government; that's state and federal government. You know, it is all tied into the election cycle, and really,
It's all about being
you
re-elected.
feel. I feel for your generation and the next generation. You're not. You know, the opportunities to buy a house, the opportunities to do a whole range of things that were pretty normal for us, and you're secure that when we were married, we could borrow and know you're going to have the security of a job to pay the mortgage off. And young people now don't know that. And as Ian said, one of the downsides with turning over CEOs every 2.5 years on average is that some of them, when they become CEOs in communities, just rent. They don't buy a house because of the uncertainty of how long they're going to be there.
Yeah.
So that also is seen sometimes by the community as they're not engaging enough within the community.
But you don't want to uproot your family for a 2.5 years.
term.
Yeah, no, it is tricky, isn't it?
It's tricky also because if you're bringing up families, you get your kids educated in school, and suddenly they've got to make friends in other places.
As you're talking to people, the whole history was the CEO was more than just the Shire Park, but the council, he'd be on all these community meetings, committees, the secretary of the fire brigade board, and all those sort of things, just part and parcel. But all that's sort of gone
now. Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of corporate knowledge that's going to walk out the door very soon, because people are getting to our age and moving on. Yeah,
probably just expanding on what Ian said. I just have in the back of my mind that Ian and I had to identify that we had the necessary qualifications and skills in terms of financial management, understanding the legislation, HR, all those sort of things were just part and parcel of getting you what they call the local government clerk certificate. Through deregulation, you don't have to do that now, and whilst the Act is prescriptive in that you've got to appoint a CEO who's got the knowledge and experience to hold the position, the reality is there's no test of that. Like I can't put up a shingle and say I'm a doctor and just go and be a doctor. I can't be an accountant or a tax agent or anything like that without qualifications. I can't be a lawyer and give advice without being accredited. But the CEOs now that it's not the same rigour in terms of checking their ability to hold that position.
So the clerk certificate was a difficult qualification? Or?
It was one you had to keep your head down, but there was a
combination of practical and
law, understanding of the law.
You had to have a degree and you had to have so many years practical experience in all different aspects.
And
it took me 9 years to get mine.
Yeah, well, it took me. I failed my final law exam before I passed it. But the old Act, I could quote sections and things like that. I can't do it as well now, but I know I can understand the legislation and interpret the legislation.
To be honest, I only looked at the act when I really had to. I just, said from memory.
Yeah.
Access this.
Because you had to have that understanding to get your qualifications. Now, CEOs now rely on the expertise of others around them. Decisions Ian and I and Gary would make would be our understanding and an interpretation of the law. There's more inclined now to get legal advice on a lot of those things.
In the old days, you could sort of give you legal advice, and if the council took you up on it, they'd go and get it proper legal advice and it'd be the same thing. So we had a good idea of where things are, but nowadays it's not worth the risk. You're really best to get the advice.
One wrong thing can ruin your career and your life, kind of.
Probably in terms of things where I saw before the changeovers now, where there used to be back in the 1980s and 1990s, the changes in local government were usually around CEOs making the wrong decisions on the computer that they'd purchased. Computerisation didn't go correctly. Council held the CEO responsible for, and they were big costs, so you had to get it right.
There was a legislation change around that time too. That's when the child clerks became CEOs. There's a whole thing about becoming more of a business.
And local government is really big business now. Not a lot of commentary around the amalgamations of 2007? 2008, there's not a lot of commentary around that. But I also, in Ian's form of Hatch, I chair the Audit and Risk Management Committee, and different local communities have adopted different strategies in terms of the amalgamation. Some of them want to still work in their individual local government areas. Others have embraced it by bringing smaller communities into a larger regional community.
There's still a strong Gatlandley one. There's still a strong Burnaby Desert one. There's probably still a strong, well, there and Omer were always sort of together, weren't they?
And Air didn't get impacted by it. They didn't get impacted by amalgamation. So
how did you manage to get away with that?
We did a few bit of representations.
I want to ask you about LGMA particularly, to finish up with. But, so
with the role now with Gary, you wondered going from local government, state government into private sector, and Gary had been in it for nearly 10 years before I joined him in 2013, and I look at it that Gary's got considerable business acumen, knows the market, knows where to work, and it's been a joy working with him too, because he's had that 10-year
I'm hoping to go
experience.
Back of these too.
But you wonder from finishing it, well, I also did some relieving work last year out at Isaac Regional Council.
In the CEO world.
Back in the CEO world, and enjoyed that. That's in a different.
Noticed the difference.
Noticed the difference. Noticed the real difference. But it's it is the market now is very challenging in local government. It's far bigger than when I got out of it. It's more regionalised now. It's more focused. It's very much focused on communities actually competing with other communities, whether it's in tourism, whether it's regional development, whether it's attracting industry into your communities to ensure you retain your employment base and you don't lose your population base. That's a big challenge now.
It's hard to define community of interest now, isn't it?
It is,
It's sort of not what it used to be. And I don't know how you define a community these regional places. As you say, the communities are competing within the regions.
Within the regions, And that's one thing I learned from working out at Isaac Regional Council. It had gone through a real boom period, and then Isaac Regional Council. It had gone through a real boom period, and then suddenly it my opposite. It just...
I was there briefly at Broadsound for a few years, for 3 years or so.
It had mining, didn't it?
It had mining,
And that sort of isn't...
It's come back.
Has it?
It's come back in Isaac and Moranbah and places like that. Big companies.
Did you ever get to St Lawrence when you were up there?
Yeah.
See the office over there?
Yeah.
That's where I was.
Oh, were you? Yeah.
That was their head office, and everything was happening over the range.
See, that's one thing. That was a little different. When you're in the north, it's vast distances. But Burdekin was, an hour's drive to a meeting was the maximum time you had to spend. But down at Isaac's the size of Tasmania, so if you had to go from Moranbah to St Lawrence, that was a 4-hour drive with a
I can remember getting up early one morning to go from St Lawrence over to Middlebourne for a meeting.
Yeah,
and,
that's a
driving
long
through all this fog and whatever in there. And just about got to Middlebourne and hit a root.
I was going to say
wiped out the car.
One thing you have it in the north, but nowhere near as much as down there. You're competing on the roads with cows and kangaroos and things like that. And all your cars have big fog lights.
When you entered state, do you think they had more to learn from you, or you had more to learn from them?
It was a learning lesson in that I believed in local government, both as a CEO and an administrator, it would be a reasonably smooth transition from local government to the state government. The reality is it wasn't. They definitely valued your local government knowledge, but I realised that local government, you can have a lot of good ideas, but the politics really determine which way things go.
Yeah.
And it's sort of gone into local government now.
It's now into local government, yeah. Politics play bigger. And it confirmed also in George Street, they're predominantly public servants who've educated in university system in the southeast corner. And I found it valuable that they wanted to tap in my knowledge of anything outside the southeast corner. And it was good working also with David Crisafulli because he was from Townsville, North Queensland, and he had a fair understanding that local government probably needed proportionally more subsidies outside the southeast corner than in the southeast corner. And that's one thing I admired in terms of policy development. It was to make little places like Jericho and Goondiwindi had two, in the subsidy scheme, they had 2 cinemas which were very much focal in their communities. And they're a focal part for those small communities. And they would have had to close because the cost of converting from real to digital for small communities like that was 200 to 300,000.
Yeah.
And the council, both those councils, put up proposals for subsidy schemes that would assist in retaining those 2 small cinemas. Now, a lot of times people in the southeast corner wouldn't know what the importance of those are from a focal community point of view. And those communities were just over the moon that the state government provided subsidy to be able to keep those cinemas open. They weren't only for cinemas, they'd have their little shows there, and live shows and things like that there. So, and you get to understand the difference between Birdsville and Boulia and Brisbane. When you're in those things, but a lot of them, it was encouraging that a lot of those public servants they'd go to people who had experience outside the southeast corner, just to get a feel. And I had a good relationship with the state public servants that I work with. They had a far greater knowledge of state government than I did, but I was appreciative of the fact that they wanted to tap in on the local knowledge. So I enjoyed those 2.5 years with the state government, then 1 year with policy advisor to David Crisafulli. So if you look at me as taking a risk at 58 to change careers, that risk is not always materialised in positive outcomes for a lot of people who do that. I'm just very appreciative that knowledge and experience is valued still, and I hope that that's still a criteria in valuing the knowledge and experience that a lot of CEOs in Queensland have now, and that rather than turning them over every 2.5 years, that if we can develop better relationships between mayors and CEOs and to understand their what are distinct and separate type roles.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we're overlooked for, or don't get credit for, is we are good listeners.
Yeah.
And we often listen and thinking at the same time, and often have good proposals to put.
Yeah.
That back in the day you'd sort of develop that.
Yeah.
Now it's all fast paced, and you don't get the opportunity to have those opportunities to listen and contribute that you used to have.
And the other thing that was a feature of Ian's and my careers and a lot of other CEOs is that you knew that if you're doing your job well, say as a director or as acting CEO or deputy shire clerk or CEO, if you're doing your job well, you had good prospects of either getting promoted to CEO or shire clerk in your own community, or being recognised by other communities that this is a young rising star that we can appoint. Sadly, I see the competency at a director level now in local government, or the second line of management, is as good or better than when I was a CEO. Sadly, they're not.
They don't want the
They don't want the CEO's position because they see the turnover.
Yeah.
And they're comfortable staying in positions and applying for other positions at that second line of management. And as I said, they're as competent and as skilled and knowledgeable as ones when we were at that area. But they just see that, sadly, we're turning over CEOs every 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, particularly when you're raising a family, you want some stability in your life. If you're going to go into a community, you look at it for 5 to 10 years, not 2.5 years.
And the brain drain from qualified people to the private sector, because
and that's another consideration. No, you don't want that. But the financial rewards a lot better now than it was when we got out. But
and the super side of it.
The super side's good. But,
we've had comments before that too, that the long hours you had to work.
Work-life
balance. Whatever, which affected your relaxation, your family life, your sporting.
Yeah. It did. And you reflect on that, particularly as your kids come along and are playing sport and things like that. And you've got a special meeting one night when your kids are playing basketball, or weekends when they've got cricket on and you're away for that. This is off the record. With Ian and I had a long association with local government managers. You'd be away, not only a few times a year, you'd have to go to conferences and things like that. So, yes, you'd lose those weekends. And I remember ringing my wife, and glad she's not here, she'd come in and kick me. I rang her one night from being away somewhere, and I said to her, "I've just called to say I love you." And she said, "Who's speaking?" Because then you realise that. But it is a balance, and it's not only CEOs and not only people like Ian and I. It's when you get to that stage, and when your grandkids come along, you realise that you're able to spend more time with your grandkids than you did sometimes with your own kids. But from a family point of view, I've got 3 wonderful kids. Carol and I got 3 wonderful kids. We chalked up 45 years this year.
Wow. Excellent.
And 45.
Feel for people like Ian, who knowing Megan as I did, and I didn't realise Ian may not have caught up with Carol, but I became state president. I was on 13 years on state executive, and I broke the mould in that I only made a conscious choice to stay on as as president for 1 year, where it usually was 2 years. The reason I did that because we still had a practice of the immediate past president stayed on the committee for another 2 years. I'd had generous support from my council, and I thought I'll give it best shot for 12 months. And it's still, I think, 2 years now, isn't it? But, it's on the executive. You don't spend like the 13 years.
You've got the choice to stay for 2 years if you want it.
Yeah. But
I can't remember if I did or I didn't. I think I did.
Yeah, I think you did.
Can't remember.
Who came after me? Did you come after me? Graham Konoski, I think, came after me. But what you heard the expression being stitched up.
Yeah.
Well, that actually happened to me when I became president of LGMA. You'd get the maroon jacket, and the ceremony was out at Gundawindi, and Gary Keller was by chance the immediate past president, and tradition he hands over the new red jacket to the incoming president, and all pomp and ceremony, and put the left arm in the sleeve, and when I went to put the right I couldn't get it out. Gary said, "What the hell? You missed the thing. Take it off again and put it on again." So did it again. Same deal. This is embarrassing. I couldn't get my hand through the right sleeve. And then there's a great laughter from the audience. So a couple of my mates had stitched up.
Deliberately stitched it up.
That's so clever. Not Gary.
No, Gary didn't know about it. No, we're the only two I don't think I knew about it.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That's when I first came onto the board. I think you were president, weren't you? Or was Gary still president?
Gary, I think, might have been president when you came on.
And you had the big decision about the CEO of that.
Yeah, that's the first decision we had to make. Bronwyn, what's that? Bronwyn.
I can't remember her name. Bronwyn. Was Bronwyn, wasn't it?
Yeah, she just wasn't working out at all.
Was that
Bronwyn.
just like prior to
before
Peter?
Tony. Before Tony.
Before Tony, okay.
Peter came after Tony.
Yeah.
So before
Browning
Tony.
Browning or something.
Browning, like that. Yeah.
So it just wasn't working?
No, we appointed her too.
To get rid of her, then they went to the footy one day and appointed Tony to take her place.
Gary said to me, "Do you got anybody in mind?" I said, "Well, Tony Wheeler might be somebody who might be interested." So Gary invited me. We were down here. Gary's been a seasoned member for Broncos, even when they were out at ANZ Stadium, and he invited me along to. And Tony must have been a member then too.
We're both seasoned members now. Yeah, Tony about the same.
So we're out there, and Tony Wheeler sitting behind us. So he got approached to become CEO of local government managers at a football game out at ANZ Stadium.
Where else?
Yeah, he's still there.
He kicked goals for a while, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, Gary, Ian, Tony, and Hoffy was a member for a little while. Hoffman? No, Greg. No, not Greg Hoffman. CEO at Chinchilla.
Oh, yeah.
Ed Hoffman. Yeah. He's no longer.
He's no longer there, no.
Yeah. So we catch up every Broncos home game now.
Yeah.
There you go.
Have a beer.
Good.
Anyway,
no,
from a career, as I said, particularly going from 58, the uncertainty at 58 as to whether there are many other opportunities out there. I can't fault probably the last chapter of my life. And now, interesting, Ian will be part of Gary's.
Well, I've got one project so
profile, but no, I've enjoyed since 2013 working with Gary. And
so Gary started reinforcements or no?
Yeah, Gary started reinforcements.
Okay.
He did some work for Morrison Lowe too.
Morrison Lowe he was with, he had reinforcements going, but he was working with Morrison Lowe.
Now it's just reinforcements.
Just reinforcements,
So is it consulting to local government? Is
that local government, and we did some state government projects and not-for-profits. We did work for North Queensland Dry Tropics.
He had to put some fine print under the name because he was getting these calls for people wanting wire fencing and things, or reinforcements. He had to put a little bracket underneath what it's about.
So in terms of
services or
the Mead Perrys and whatnot, is that a similar space? Are they competitors?
Yeah.
Okay.
Keith introduced me to local government managers and also to rostrum public speaking, because I was the ultimate introvert when I joined local government.
I find that hard to believe, don't you?
No, that's what I mean. I talk too much now. But rostrum's been a powerful influence in terms of gaining communication skills, public speaking club. And particularly when I was up at Innisfail,
It's called rostrum.
Rostrum.
Is it like Toastmasters?
Yeah, like Toastmasters.
So what do you do there? I've never really understood the concept.
It educating you in public speaking and
do you
taking...
go and public speak in front of people?
Yeah. And within local government managers, I think I did 60 presentations over the years.
Yeah, he's always speaking.
He's always speaking. One that everybody remembers was a speech I did at a conference at Bond University, and the subject was simply the best. And it was a correlation between learning your leadership skills through sport and recreation and see whether they translate to leadership skills in your work environment. And that was back before, mostly you go to conferences and they'd have TV screens. If you're using a PowerPoint or something like that, everybody had to look at a little screen. But that was the first one I went where they projected it all up on a big screen. And I used simply the best because I introduced it with Tina Turner's, and you remember the footballers? And I didn't even rehearse it, but I just gave them the tape and they did it. And they said, you come back down from the back. And I had learnt my whole speech paraphrased because I thought, this is going to have impact. I've got to be able to not read from my notes and just give it, present. And they put this lifeless thing, Tina Turner singing Simply the Best up on the screen. I was gobbled. And everybody says, Webb, you used to give a lot of papers at conferences. I always remember that one you did Simply the Best. I said, what do you remember about it? I can't remember the speech. I can just remember Tina Turner. Don't know what you said, but...
So I wonder if we got all those speeches somewhere. A lot of good stuff at conferences over the years.
Yeah, we get them if people provide them.
But
if it's
so they're still recorded. They would be back before they...
Well, we have their notes and presentation and whatnot, but if it's IP, then they won't give it. They don't give it.
I guess we've still got a mentality of an annual conference, so it's sort of this thing that isn't one event a year that brings us all together. We used to have a week conference, a sport day, and then Jim Pennell, bless him, my chair at the time, was the LGAQ president, decided that was too long. You should have the same as the LGAQ. I'd come back to 3 days, and that was that.
But as well as Keith Venables being a mentor, as I said, I've learned a lot from people before me, like Charlie Grant.
Yeah, Charlie Grant would be one of mine.
Keith Stuckey and Stan Fersman and Jack Pender.
What was the Indigenous project you worked on?
What happened with that was Desley Boyle was the minister.
You know a name from the past?
Yeah. She approached, there was a team, the head of the team was CEO at Noosa now, Brett DeCastle. Brett DeCastle led the team with Scotty Mead, and me, John, who works for Scotty. John Perry, yeah. I think that was about it. And she got, the opposition gave her an absolute caning in Parliament because there were 20 Indigenous communities and 18 of them hadn't got their financials in by time, hadn't done their annual reports and anything like that. And they gave her a fair caning over that. 18 out of 20, I think they were, And she got us together. And she said, you've got 6 months to turn this around, go up, provide your understanding and any assistance you can. So we worked, we broke up into 2 in a team. I was with John Perry, and we went into different communities. And the sad thing about that is that they were turning CEOs over pretty consistently, so there's no continuity. And we helped them with their financials, things like that. And she wanted us to get, it was 2 out of 20, she wanted us to at least get between 10 and 15. And we got 18 out of the 20, so she was happy that had their financials completed on time and audited that for the following year. But just looking at the Auditor General's report, it's gone back again. And it's really to do with turning over CEOs. You know, they don't get, and getting good quality finance people into those communities.
Yeah, it's right.
It's hard. Yeah.